This video was brought to you by Brilliant. It's no secret that Americans are extremely dissatisfied with their politics. Gallup polling suggests that just 8% of Americans have confidence in Congress, down from about 30% in the early 2000s, and that only 26% have faith in the presidency, down from about 50%. Disenchanted by the two main parties, many Americans now want an alternative, and polling from just after the 2020 presidential election found that a record 62% of Americans wanted a third party. Unfortunately for American voters, though, few third-party movements in American history have ever gained significant momentum, and the Republicans and Democrats have been able to maintain their political duopoly despite their broad unpopularity. Nonetheless, even if they haven't won, third parties have been occasionally influential. And if 2024 ends up being Trump versus Biden, who both have approval ratings below 40%, then the political ground will be ripe for a third candidate. Now, lots of names are flying around at the moment, including centrist Democrat Joe Manchin, potential Green Party candidate Cornel West, and even JP Morgan's CEO Jamie Dixon. So in this video, we're going to take a look at the history of third parties in the US, whether a third party candidate could plausibly win the popular vote, and what would happen if they did. Before we start, if you haven't already, please consider subscribing and ringing the bell to stay in the loop and be notified when we release new videos. So let's start by taking a look at some of the more influential third-party movements and candidates in recent times. Perhaps the most notable case here is Ross Perot, a Texas billionaire businessman who launched his run for the presidency in 1992, challenging Republican George H.W. Bush and Democrat Bill Clinton. Now, Perot pitched himself as a moderate, opposing the newly created NAFTA trade agreement, which was popular among Rust Belt workers, a reliable Democratic constituency at the time, while also taking a hard line against illegal immigration, which appealed to Southern conservatives. And this ideology actually seemed popular because a somewhat astonishing poll from June 1992 found Perot actually ahead of both Bush and Clinton, with 36% of the popular vote to Bush's 30 and Clinton's 26. However, after campaign missteps like picking a controversial running mate and dropping out and re-entering the race, he only ended up with 18.9% of the vote. But although Perot finished in third place in this race, this is the closest that a third-party candidate has got to winning the popular vote in modern times. And because there's no other recent examples, the other case worth mentioning is from 1912, when former President Theodore Roosevelt made a third-party run under the Progressive Party after losing the Republican nomination to incumbent President Taft. And Roosevelt actually did pretty well here, beating Taft in the popular vote and winning 27.4% to Taft's 23.2%. But ultimately, they just ended up splitting the Republican vote and helping Democrat Woodrow Wilson get into the White House with 41.8% of the vote. So, in this context, is it really possible to win the popular vote as a third party? Well, no one's done it, so it's clearly very difficult, but the Ross Perot experience suggests that it might well be possible. While other third candidates usually see their poll ratings decline as election day nears,
please clap.
Perot was still leading the pack by nearly 10 points against two relatively competent politicians in Bush and Clinton. Against Trump and Biden, though, a third candidate with Perot's money and political nous might well be able to win the popular vote. But even if a third candidate won the popular vote, it doesn't necessarily mean they'd win the presidency. After all, Hillary Clinton famously won the popular vote in 2016, but lost the Electoral College and the presidency to Donald Trump. And ultimately, it's the Electoral College where third candidates really come up against it. That's because for a third candidate to win 270 Electoral College votes, and therefore the presidency, they wouldn't just have to have more votes than the Democrat and Republican candidates. They'd also have to win in a lot of states, which is just unlikely. As a matter of fact, using the 2024 electoral map, a third-party candidate could win the top 10 states with the most electoral votes and still fall short of the 270 votes needed in the Electoral College to actually win the White House. So clearly, even if a third candidate won a plurality of votes, they'd still be unlikely to win an outright majority of electoral college votes, because the electoral college would be split between 3 candidates, and the most likely outcome here would be that no candidate will win the 270 electoral college votes required for the presidency. So what would actually happen in this situation when a third party wins a plurality of votes, but not a majority in the electoral college? Well, in that instance, the president will be selected by the newly elected House of Representatives, while the vice president will be chosen by the newly elected Senate in a contingent election when Congress was sworn in on January 3rd. Now, the vice president will be elected with a simple majority among senators, while the president would be elected by a special election in the House. Under the rules of this special election, each state delegation would vote as a block, with each state having a single vote. And in order to win, a candidate must receive an absolute majority of state delegation votes, i.e., win with 26 states to become president. In practice, this would make it a 2-horse race between the Democrat and Republican candidate, because each state would have either a Democrat or Republican majority. California, for example, has a heavy Democrat majority in its congressional representation, so the Democrat candidate would almost certainly get the California vote, while Wyoming, with its sole Republican representative, would give its vote to the Republican, assuming that the representatives fall along party lines. This all means that even if a third candidate won a plurality of votes, unless they won the Electoral College outright, they would lose the presidency, assuming that the Republican and Democratic representatives in the House and Senate vote along party lines for their presidential candidates, which does feel likely. So, after all of this, is there any hope for third parties and their candidates? Well, to be completely honest, no, not really. After all, it's very, very hard to imagine a third-party candidate doing sufficiently well to win an outright majority in the Electoral College, especially when you consider that only 2 third-party candidates have ever won any Electoral College votes in modern history, and those were both segregationist Dixiecrats, i.e., Democrats who opposed civil rights reforms. And without a majority in the Electoral College, no third party really stands a chance of winning in a special election in the House of Representatives. But even if they can't win, that doesn't mean that they can't affect the result, especially when the 2 other candidates are so unpopular and there's so much demand for a new face. Given how close the polls suggest a Trump-Biden rerun would really be, even a slightly popular third-party candidate could tilt the race one way or another. So it'll be worth keeping an eye on some of these people over the next few months. Now, you just spent around 8 minutes watching a video to help you learn more about the world around you. And that feels good, right? Well, that's the feeling you get from spending time learning and bettering yourself. And if you want to do this more, then we have good news. Long-term sponsor of the channel, Brilliant, are giving the first 200 people who click our link 20% off their annual premium subscription. Now, Brilliant is an interactive online learning platform which is full of all kinds of courses which can help you improve your career and further your understanding of the world. They have more than 100 courses on everything from predicting with probability to how technology works to the concept of infinity. And these may sound like topics you need to dedicate a lot of your time to, but you really don't. With Brilliant, you can master big concepts in as little as 15 minutes a day, and you can do this anywhere, anytime. You can find our link in the description to get that special offer. And as always, thanks for watching, and thank you to Brilliant for supporting TLDR.